This reminds us that we are connected to the earth. We belong to the earth. The earth doesn't belong to us. The earth is powerful. Nature is powerful. My son and I went to the river. We went and we put tobacco into the water, just like our old people showed us how to do. We prayed for the people and their suffering.
I didn't hear what happened in St. Gav. The dike blew.
It's a question of wiping out what we've built for 3 generations.
Hey yo ho, way yo hey yo ho, hey yeah, hey yeah, hey yeah, hey yeah, hey, way ya hey yeah, hey yeah. We offered a prayer for the people and the animals that were suffering at the time.
And they had nowhere to go except through the water. So the water is glacier, cold. And then they went in, one after another, and went swimming. And I'll never forget that.
Well, I'll have to tell her the way it is. Material things can always be rebuilt.
I remember when he started to cry, just thinking, I don't know what to say. There's nothing that you can say to him, because unless you've been in that situation where you've lost what he just did, which was everything.
Hello, I'm Diana Swain. For thousands of years, the Red River has given life to the generations that have stopped all along these shady banks. But as Art Shoffley has just told us, the rising red and angry red can also bring great suffering. And that's our story. The story of a gentle river turned angry. The story of ordinary people turned heroes. All of it captured by CBC television cameras during the Great Flood of 1997. A story that begins after a very long winter.
It's over, but just barely. What Winnipeggers hope is the last slap in the face from an unusually cruel winter. While some people were busy today snowboarding off their roofs, others were trying to get to work and wondering what they did to deserve this.
Typical Winnipeg, what can you say?
Did something wrong, I guess, eh? Maybe we're not living right or something.
For 2 days, it did nothing but snow and blow, throwing most of the province into chaos. In rural Manitoba, highways were shut down, hydro lines snapped, and hundreds of travelers were stranded at the border. Driving on city streets yesterday, nearly impossible. Today, an adventure. Now the temperature has dropped. As a result, the snow is like concrete. But for some, that's not even the worst of it. Here's the problem. Underneath all this snow, sandbags. Sandbags that are now pretty much useless. Jim Shapiro has 11,000 frozen solid on his front lawn. With record flooding expected this spring, he was rushing to get them in place. Now he's really worried.
We're also facing financial ruin also. This situation is going to cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars.
City officials forced to divert flood crews to snow removal say this is going to hurt.
And the amount of precipitation we got, it's certainly safe to say, is not going to help the flood situation.
Just how bad won't be known until the melt begins. But as if to add insult to injury, that won't happen for a while. Temperatures are expected to remain below freezing until at least the end of the week. Red Sharon, CBC News, Winnipeg.
The experts worry that a flood of awesome proportions is coming. As the snow melts, Manitobans raise the dikes and prepare for the worst. Then shocking pictures from upriver in Grand Forks, North Dakota. Pictures that drive the danger home.
From the air, it's now impossible to tell where the Red River is supposed to flow. On the ground, they're doing their best to keep it from going where it wants. Trucks and bulldozers try to shore up makeshift clay dikes. Over 14,000 volunteers are sandbagging around the clock. But right now, it's a losing battle. The problem is the water's now starting to breach the sewer system, It's starting to breach the dikes, and there doesn't seem to be any way to stop it. The water is finding a way through. Even the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers couldn't stop it, having to abandon equipment as an entire dike gave way.
This is all my yard.
Sally Thompson, like thousands of others, has surrendered. Her 113-year-old Victorian home is right in the river's path. It's made it through a few floods, but with water pushing at the basement windows and running through the fuse box, she's leaving, afraid it won't survive the flood of '97.
I think my house is slowly going to be destroyed.
Officials say their first priority is keeping people safe. So it's no longer voluntary. Thousands have been ordered out, and they aren't ruling out evacuating the entire city. People don't have to be convinced.
Here, and if this is the highest point in Grand Forks and we're taking water, you know what kind of situation we're in.
Bob Alderson has been in the same spot 50 years. With the trunk full, he's headed for higher ground, the water lapping at his driveway.
Depressed and getting a little bit tired. It's been a long battle. Seen things I never dreamed I would see, you know, and it hurts. It's gonna take a long time for us to recover.
But there is no escape right now. The battle is to keep the one remaining bridge across the river open, but the water keeps creeping. No one is quite sure when it will stop. Red Sharon, CBC News, Grand Forks, North Dakota. It was almost too much to believe. A large section of downtown Grand Forks going up in flames, one of the worst fires in the city's history, in the middle of one of the worst floods on record. No one knows how it started, but with access for fire crews restricted by water over a meter deep, it just kept burning. Finally, an air attack using fire-retarding chemicals helped at least contain it, but the damage was done.
We have 11 buildings that are either completely destroyed or that there is extensive damage.
The fire department says it rescued over 20 people from burning buildings, but it doesn't know if anyone died. They're still unable to search the rubble. At least 4 firefighters have suffered severe hypothermia from working up to their waists in freezing water. All this water, and now apparently not a drop to drink. The city's water supply has failed, so has the sewer system, so the evacuation call is out for the entire city of 50,000.
My own home is going under. It may not be total, but now I am in the same bucket with the rest of you.
The mayor, afraid of another flash fire, is asking everyone to just leave. In critical areas, if residents don't, they face arrest. James Moe didn't have to be told twice.
We've done a lot to try to help, you know. Between me and my wife, we've sandbagged, and it's really sad and awful to see these people. It's
pretty disheartening.
It is.
He's loaded up the truck and is headed for Oregon. Some people haven't been lucky enough to get anything out.
We can't allow anybody past 46.
I have to go get my stuff. I'm a nurse at the hospital, and they won't let me leave town.
Ma'am, I'm sorry.
This woman sends a desperate plea to families she can't contact.
You're in our prayers, okay? Wherever you're at today. Their house is totally underwater.
Most of Grand Forks is in the same situation as the water keeps rising and residents wonder, could it possibly get any worse? Red Sharon, CBC News, Grand Forks, North Dakota.
And here we go. Good release now.
April 22nd. Former Premier Duff Roblin throws the switch, raising the gates to the Winnipeg floodway. He faced down tough criticism when his government built the floodway in the 1960s. But now Roblin is about to become a hero. His floodway will save the city. Meanwhile, evacuation orders are issued for towns along the river in southern Manitoba. The flood of the century begins.
This lake was a farmer's field, and we're have the boat motor wide open. We're on a farmer's field, and we couldn't get over it. So we kept on checking for the depth of the water. So we had a paddle that was about 4.5 feet long. It's 5 feet if you reach in. And for the most part, we couldn't touch the ground. There was that much water. And it was unreal.
South of Morris, the sirens wailed in Letellier this morning, signaling the start of the evacuation. That sent residents scrambling to pack up. They have to be out by tonight.
This is the worst ever, and it's scary.
Down the road at the Roseau River Reserve, Grand Chief Phil Fontaine surveyed the scene. The rising water has forced all 700 people here to leave.
We'll see what happens when the floodwaters hit your full force.
In Emerson, fire crews were busy shoring up the dike holding back the Red River. They're among the only people left in the town. Deputy Mayor Larry Propp says the 750 town residents left last night, leaving the streets completely empty.
Only necessary workers are left in town. It's a ghost town, that's right.
You'll be touching water, so proceed with extreme caution. Thank you.
Road access throughout the Red River Valley is quickly washing away. The highway department is expecting so much water, 5-foot poles are being erected so emergency crews will be able to locate the roads.
At the rate that the river is rising, that there is a chance, I guess, of it going over.
And water is covering more roads across the Red River Valley region each hour. This is Highway 75 south of Morris. This morning, we were able to drive right down here. Now, water covers it, and the current is so strong I'm having difficulty keeping my balance. It's obviously closed now, and by tomorrow, most roads in this region will be closed to all traffic except emergency vehicles getting into the communities to help fight the floods and evacuees who are trying to leave those communities. Francis Silvaggio, CBC News, near Morris.
So you can just give her the yellow copy.
They've come from all over southern Manitoba, ordered out of their homes with nowhere to go, except here, the evacuee center in St. Vital.
We have one son in the city, same name. And he lives
Some are registering only to return home to try to pack up their belongings before they're claimed by the Red River. Others are simply overwhelmed. The city has counselors on hand to help.
They're answering any kinds of the counseling questions, any kind of the personal needs that people are looking for, questions that people have, because we understand that people are going to be upset about having to leave their own home and leave their belongings behind.
Young or old, all are searching for a place to stay. Although more than 170 Winnipeggers have offered up their homes to the city's flood hotline, so far there are 3,000 hotel rooms to accommodate the evacuees. Many hotels are cutting their rates in half. But finding a place to stay is one problem. Finding a school is another. Soon there will be plenty of new kids showing up at Winnipeg schools.
I don't like going to a different school, making new friends and stuff. Won't be worth it.
Kind of scary?
Sort of, yeah.
It could be a month before these people are allowed to go home, and even longer before things return to normal. Kirk Williams, CBC News, Winnipeg.
As people are driven from their homes in rural Manitoba, the city of Winnipeg declares a state of emergency. Sandbagging begins in low-lying areas. People empty their basements and plug their drains, fearing the sewers will back up. And just southwest of Winnipeg, a frantic effort is underway to stop the water from sneaking in the back door.
Today near Brunkild, Manitoba, massive amounts of heavy equipment up against the massive power of Mother Nature. And caught in the middle, people like Ken Dick. He lives near Brunkild and his home is at risk.
Do you have a family here?
I've got one son, little son. Just haven't seen him for 2 days here. I'm sorry. It's pretty emotional.
Water coming up from southern Manitoba is backing up the Morris River southwest of Winnipeg. The overflow will soon turn this area into a big lake within the week. Now the province is scrambling to build a massive 16-mile dike. It runs southwest of the city. It will keep the water from flowing into the LaSalle River and making its way towards Winnipeg.
This overflow from the Morris into the LaSalle wasn't a problem in '79. I don't think was looked at probably, in hindsight, geez, we should have done something about that.
Now they are, but they only have days to do it before the water creeps closer. A project like this would normally take a month. They have 3 days.
And how high is it going to be?
It varies. Right here on this stake, it's about an 8-foot fill.
For volunteers who are helping feed the workers, anxiety is high.
What comes, and we're prepared.
The province says as long as it doesn't rain and there's showers in the forecast, the dike will be completed in time. But there's no guarantee the dike will hold back the waters.
Well, there's always concern about a dike that's built, whether it'll hold or not, but I feel right what we're constructing here today is a good dike.
Late this afternoon, Natural Resources says it's still analyzing what will happen if the dike gives way. A dike that for now, they are cautiously optimistic will hold its own. Colleen Rajat, CBC News, near Brunkild.
2 or 3 farm families were located. The idea was to follow the farmers and do a diary of sorts. I think what will always surprise me the most is the fact that we did choose these producers miles apart, and when it came right down to it, to the flood affecting them, which it did in both cases drastically, it almost happened the same day. That's how fast the waters traveled. We were basically racing the waters to go from one farm family to the other to make sure that we could keep up to date with what was happening to them.
Dennis now makes final plans to move his cows and begins to seriously question the future of his family home.
Because in '79, the current was so bloody strong, and add another 2-3 feet to that, our house might fall over. Like, I'm worried. I'm really worried this time. Kelly doesn't know it yet, but the house might not be there.
Dennis Houle, with our dairy producer, the one memory I'll have is the day that it all seemed, the crunch seemed to come to the Houle farm. He had to travel away with his dairy cattle. He had to get them out, and of course he had to continue with milking. That's a dairy producer's life.
Nice tank, eh? Yeah. Full of water? Doesn't float away.
He comes back to the farmyard. He's beat, he's exhausted. He's taken his cattle to a totally foreign environment. And as he said, these are his girls. They're not just his cows. A couple of them have been injured. He's been with a neighbor who's had to shoot one of the cows, and you could see that it was gut-wrenching to him, such an unnecessary death of an animal because of the panic of getting them out. He basically broke down, and when he turned away from us with tears in his eyes, I think as a unit we just knew right then this man had to be with his family and his kids. He did not need us to be around him any longer. There was nothing more he could say to show us, or that we could show the public in diarizing this, how defeated he was at that point. It was all said with him walking into the darkness.
Here, sir.
Wrong day. Yeah, I feel like crying. Too
In terms of our chicken producer, the memory that'll stay with me there is this decision suddenly that he was going to move these chickens out. It was better to rush them out and have them prematurely killed than to see them starve or to see them drown. And having all these volunteers come in who happened to be youth group members from a couple of churches in Killarney, kids who expected to be helping out with the volunteer effort by loading up sandbags. They were given the directions, okay, this is how you carry a handful of chickens out of a barn, and you've got 18,000. We've got to try to unload this barn before the floodwaters get here. And that literally was a race of getting ahead of the water. You almost felt like you were cheering on the Stanley Cup at that point, or we're supposed to be observers. But you can't be in that case. I mean, you do want to see the people that you've gotten to know. You want to see them win, especially against these waters that have devastated so many people.
With so many families losing the battle with the river, reinforcements are called in. By the time the crest hits Winnipeg, much of Canada's military is fighting the flood. These men and women will be among the many heroes made by the Rising Red.
It's hard to imagine how much water is out there until you see it from a helicopter. It's incredible. Ring dikes around what can now be called the island of Morris are still holding. The same is true for the town of Rosenort and Emerson. But everywhere there are signs of people who are not so lucky. Homes have been flooded and roads are lost under the water. Trains have been abandoned, and you can't cross the U.S. border unless you have a boat. Back on the ground, about 100 people who live just south of St. Norbert lost their battle with the flood today. The water has forced them out of their homes. Up until today, they thought they might win.
We're trying to move the stuff, but there's no help now to get the stuff out of the all your personal stuff that you gathered in 60 years. Excuse me.
For some people, leaving is excruciating, but so is the thought of coming back.
We lost, but now we have to go back and clean up in a month, and I don't know where the energy or the resources are going to come from, because we spent them all fighting and losing.
It's hard to believe when you see it from the air, but there's still a lot more water on its way. Rick Ratty, CBC News, over Emerson.
Today, some of the sandbag dikes near Rosenort were simply no match for the waves. Already a church, a senior's home, and at least a dozen houses have been lost in the area outside of Rosenort. But still, some people are reluctant to leave their isolated homes and farms. The Reeve of Rosenort understands why some people are taking their chances beyond his community's ring dike.
Can you imagine if your life savings are just snapped away? You're going to fight for it. These people are no different.
But those people living outside of Rosenort are facing some dreadful conditions. Just ask Robert Christensen. He's spent a lifetime fishing on Lake Winnipeg. He's now helping the Coast Guard on this new lake.
I never thought it'd be in a field, going on the top of a field, and 5 feet of water with waves breaking over the front.
Out on the water, the search is on for people ready to leave.
The Army's right here behind us, and they're ready to evac as soon as we get a name.
It doesn't take long to find someone who's had enough.
Very good indeed. Good to see you guys. Getting a bit choppy out there. It's very, very choppy. Yeah. Very good, but I think it's about time to call it a day. There's a limit to what the pumps can do, and I think they've now done it.
John Irvin and his wife have been fighting the water for days, but they've reached the end.
Water is now beginning to get into the basement. We've got a very choppy lake out there, and I think it's time that we allowed counsels of prudence to prevail and just got out as soon as the earliest opportunity presents itself.
Well, that would be us, I guess.
I suppose it is.
With bags packed and a very scared dog in tow, the Irvins abandon their home and leave for Winnipeg. But like so many other people, they have no idea how much of their home will still be there when they come back. Alan Habbock, CBC News, Winnipeg.
They thought they could win. They were wrong. The community of St. Agath has fallen. The mighty Red River has won. The once pristine river community of 500 is now part of the river. At 1:30 this morning, the water breached a railway line that was part of the town's dike system. They thought the rail line was high enough. It wasn't.
That happened within minutes. That was totally unexpected, and there's nothing to react to, or just one of those things, unfortunately.
The river's surge surprised the 22 people still in St. Agath. They were immediately evacuated from the community. Jacques Courcelles was one of the last remaining residents.
Oh, c'était horrible.
It was horrible, he says. There was a wave coming. It was 4 feet. When you see that coming through your village, you know there's a lot of destruction coming. The destruction can be seen everywhere. 5 feet of water now covers the entire community. Constable Richard Bro organized the evacuation and says the river offered little time to react.
The water was very fast, coming very quickly, and within an hour, the town was totally underwater.
A soldier helping in the evacuation had to be treated for hypothermia after running into a wave. The river spared his life, but not the town's. The Reeve said Mother Nature is playing her cards and is winning. Tonight, the rest of the Red River Valley is hoping for a better deal than St. Agath's. Francis Silvangio, CBC News, St. Agath.
Victor Duminil hasn't slept in more than 36 hours, hasn't seen his wife in nearly a week. This afternoon, he arrives in Winnipeg, one of the last people to leave St. Agathe.
Well, the first thing was to save lives. I mean, I didn't think about anything else. I think right now I'm more or less in a state of shock, like maybe I'm not really realizing if I'm very tired. It has been a long 9 days, 10 days, whatever.
Devastation. I mean, there's nothing else to express this, actually, because it's a complete devastation.
This evacuee center in Winnipeg has been taking in people from St. Agathe and other communities for days. Never is support needed more than now.
They may be in a shock of not realizing where they're going to go, if they're going to have a home to go back to. A lot of anxiety and a lot of uncertainty.
We heard on the radio St. Agathe is underwater. I thought he was joking at first, but then we thought, no, it can happen, and it did.
Ramo Mamaril, also from St. Agathe, is tracking the flood by computer. He says there's nothing to do now but help communities still at risk.
What am I doing now? There's nothing to worry about for me now. The house is underwater, so, you know, the climax is over.
It could be weeks before people from St. Agathe are able to return to their community, a town that fought the Red River for days but was finally beaten. Danielle Kiefler, CBC News, Winnipeg.
We had arranged to get into the community with the military, and we invited one resident to come with us, Louis Robert. He had no idea, and we had no idea what we were in store for. So we went into the community, and you know, on the way in, he was talking a little bit about his feelings, how anxious he was. In the distance, Louis Robert sees the familiar site of the St. Agathe Chapel, welcoming him home for the first time since Saturday.
I'm very anxious to see it now.
He was forced to leave his home along with the rest of the 450 residents of St. Agathe.
In our own mind, we were sure that there was going to be no problem. Our biggest concern could have been sewer backup more than floodwaters.
But the floodwaters came, and as we entered the once pristine river community, water greeted us from all sides.
This is our church, the Roman Catholic Church. And
as we float down the street, more water. In the school, supplies can be seen floating through a window. Pets have been left behind, a sign of how fast residents were forced to leave. And home upon home, all overtaken by the river. But then as we turned the corner to where his house was, everything kind of changed. His house was right behind where the breach was. So it turned out to be the hardest hit home.
Right up here. This is the
basement?
This is the basement. And I see that it's right full of water.
His entire house is filled with water. It has receded in parts, but lingers in others.
You're going up to a step now.
The damage is extensive. He hardly believes his own eyes. He's not looking forward to telling his wife.
Well, we'll have to tell her the way it is. Material things can always be rebuilt. We can start from, well, maybe not scratch, but, you know, start down the line wherever we have to and just keep going back up again.
You could just see it right there. He didn't even have to say a word. You knew exactly what was going through his mind. You know, he knew that everything from this point on in his life, in terms of living in that community, had changed.
When you're up here with so much water, it's hard to tell where you're at. So the best way is to try to find the Red River and use that as a navigation point. And the only way to find the Red is to look for a tree line that parallels itself and winds through. Just about no other way to know where you're at in southern Manitoba right now.
And as we were flying, one of the things that really struck me was as you're shooting the houses going by, surrounded by dikes, surrounded with water, was that every house had a story. Every single piece of property, somebody was immediately, incredibly, in fact, affected at that time. And that was a big image to me.
Throughout this part of the valley are the farms, many diked and holding, others lost to the rising water. from Winnipeg toward the south. It's as if Winnipeg has suddenly been moved to the edge of a massive lake, a lake that's pressing slowly but surely north.
I went out with Diana, and we're flying in a helicopter. It was her first time ever up. And as we flew out of the city and over the floodway, all I saw was this line of water starting, and as far as the eye could see in any direction was water. It was unbelievable. I had some idea of what I was expecting, but to watch it through her eyes was amazing.
Every now and then you see an example, a vivid one, of just how powerful the water is. Look how it's eaten through that road, and the water is spilling through it. Well, for the most part, the dike communities have been safe. Same is not true outside. In fact, 1 in 4 farms has been lost to the water. As you come up to diked homes, you find yourself hopeful for them that those dikes have held. But unfortunately, as often as not, you find properties where the water has simply been too much. We're in an area just north of Rosenort, and this is where the Red River is now at its widest, stretching 40 kilometers across, which is remarkable for anybody who knows what it should look like. This is a community of St. Agathe, which had been dry, but it's the only dike community where it couldn't hold the water out, and it rushed in overnight on Tuesday, forcing 36 people out in a hurry. What you see now is the cemetery at St. Agathe, and as little as 3 days ago, you couldn't see any grass. The water here is receding. Outside the main dikes in most communities, it's hit and miss. One property is dry, the other not. But inside communities like St. Adolphe, things look good. About 1,200 people normally live here. Right now, 20 are here protecting the town. This may go down as one of the more creative engineering feats of this flood. Derelict cars and old buses piled on top of the dike to hold the water back and to act as a buffer between the water when it's buffeted by the wind and the dike itself. The contrasts up here are remarkable. On the one hand, to the south, the water sweeping over farmland, homes, communities. But as you turn north, dry farmland as far as the eye can see, and in between the Brunkhill Dike. We're just south of the floodway now, and you can see the activity here. People working around the clock to build up these dikes, a number of the military here to build this dike. Just look how deep it is. This is the floodway gate, and you can see the contrast here between the water level here and as it drops into Winnipeg. The rest is diverted away into Duff's Ditch. But even here, homes have lost the battle. The first home north of the floodway, for instance. In Winnipeg, the homes may be protected, but there's no question the Red has spilled its banks. This is St. Vital Park. Doesn't matter how much water there is, some things never change. For most people in Winnipeg, this is as close as they'll get to see flooding. Most of the homes in the city are protected, but the mere thought that the water is so high has drawn people to the forks every day to see firsthand what it's done.
I found the experience of the 2 weeks extremely emotional. Even today, I find it emotional.
Denver town, it seems like there's more and more water.
It's a question of wiping out what we've built for 3 generations.
The Army's right here behind us, and they're ready to evac as soon as we get a date.
what happened in St. Agathe. The dike blew.
Hey-ya-ho, hey-ya-hey-ya-ho, hey-ya, 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 hey-hey, way-ya, hey-ya, hey-ya, hey-hey.
This was the frantic scene this afternoon in the Maples as rescue crews searched for 14-year-old Adam Young, who was swept into the sewer system.
If he long kept his head above water, there's a chance that we could probably catch him and find him.
Firefighters at a nearby station say around noon a young child ran in and said 2 children had fallen into a ditch and one had been sucked into the sewer. Firefighters managed to rescue one of the boys, but Adam Young was missing. Crews of divers plunged into the freezing waters, searching pipes that are only 24 inches wide. Police brought in sandbags to divert water from the ditch that runs along Layla. Roto-Rooter was called in to bring a special camera which they hope would help them find the boy. Firefighters went from manhole cover to manhole cover trying to spot Adam Young. They didn't. Late this afternoon, they called off the search along the street and are now looking further along the system.
He's funny. He's really nice.
Flowers for a missing friend. Today, students from ACO Leela North gathered at a ditch off Leela Avenue. They were dropping off carnations at the site where one of their schoolmates disappeared yesterday. Rescue crews searched frantically for hours looking for 14-year-old Adam Young. Adam and 2 friends were playing in this ditch when he was sucked into this open culvert and down into the city's sewer system. He has not been found. The tragedy has raised the ire of many neighbors who have complained about these ditches for years.
Get the ditch out of here. If you have a sewer system, don't leave a place where you're going to entertain kids to play in water. We know what kids are like.
The culvert that Young was sucked into had no grate. The city says grates would likely clog the system. So for now, they are open, and even the city admits it's dangerous.
And they can exert a significant suction and cause whirlpools in the ditch system.
The city is now looking at whether or not some type of fence should be constructed around open culverts. But as for the ditches, Councillor Mike O'Shaughnessy says they will remain because residents haven't paid for the local improvements. Dal Simon, CBC News, Winnipeg.
There's been a lot of talk about who's to blame and why it happened and how it happened. And my family would just, that's not an issue right now. We have 2 priorities. The first one is to get him out of there. And the second is that this never happens again. Sorry. This is a parent's nightmare. And I just don't want to have to ever walk up to a parent and say, I know what you're going through.
As the crest of the Red River approaches the city, the eyes of the nation, indeed the world, are on Winnipeg. Inside the city, which is protected by the floodway and a system of sandbag dikes, the memories of Grand Forks and St. Agathe are still fresh, and people keep an uneasy vigil. There are many unanswered questions. How much water is coming? Will the floodway be enough? And will the emergency dike at Brunkild hold?
The water is coming.
When I went out there and saw 40 caterpillars and them all sort of moving around the ground like basically huge insects off in the distance, I really got the sense that this was just a mega project.
Behind all this massive machinery, mayhem, and muck is a story about selflessness,
Sandwiches are out there, and we'll just get some
sacrifice, and a whole lot of sweat.
You want to cut those onions again, please?
For the past week, Marjorie and her husband Crawford have been chopping veggies and whipping up muffins for workers on the front lines of the Brunkill Dike.
I'm not strong enough to sandbag or too old, and so I can sure cook, and so why not?
These are hard rations.
Don Sharma is posted in Domain near the dike. He says if it wasn't for all the volunteers doing kitchen duty, he'd be eating pre-cooked, vacuum-packed rations.
But this is one of my favorite ones. Everyone else hates them, so I like it anyways. Cabbage rolls with a tomato sauce. It's not bad.
Instead, all week, he and other workers have had homemade chili and other goodies. Food prepared by people like the Crawfords that's been trucked in from Morden, Carman, Winnipeg, just to name a few communities. Here in Domain, the two women sitting at the table who wish to remain anonymous work 20-hour days to dish up the victuals.
I wish everybody could be like this around, you know, like they've come together so well and helping out.
They treat us exactly like family.
We saw all these little old ladies baking cookies and writing these little notes saying, God bless you, keep up the good work. And they're actually putting these in the lunch bags for all the guys out on the dike. And the guys were out there working like 36 hours at a time. They were tired, they were cold, they hadn't slept for days, and they open up this little lunch bag, and there's this little note from a little old lady in a little town saying, God bless you, keep up the good work. And that really, I think, touched them, and it touched me to know that there were so many people out there rooting for these guys who were trying to get a job, a huge job done.
Workers who couldn't leave their big machines had handmade lunches brought to them, complete with a little morale booster.
Well, I thought it's nice somebody appreciates what we're doing out here.
These were baked and brought in by members of the Carman and Graysville congregations.
In Carman, Manitoba, donations continue to be dropped off. Back out on the Brunkill Dike, strong winds are predicted for Sunday, which will put additional pressure on the dike. And while the stress of keeping it sound won't go away soon, one thing is for sure, no one will go hungry, and the effort will not go unappreciated. Colleen Rajat, CBC News, near Domain.
We're into uncharted waters right now. The river is looking the highest I've ever can remember seeing it. It's probably a foot above last year at this present time. It's probably traveling around 10 or 12 miles an hour. There's a lot of undercurrents, very dangerous. We're a lot closer to the bottom of this bridge than we were yesterday.
So this has come up since yesterday?
Oh, yes.
I went with Joe Petracci, who's the harbor patrol master in Winnipeg, on the very first day that he was able to put his boat in the water. And in a concrete way, the fact that a flood was coming could no longer be denied in my own mind, because I reached up and touched the Provence Street Bridge. And 2 days later, Joe could not get his boat in the water anymore. And 2 days after that, the Provence Street Bridge was closed. So it was, for me, an indicator of just how much water was coming.
So this is the Provence Street Bridge, and the river is expected to get 4 feet higher than this. I mean, I can tell you right now, I can reach up and touch the bottom of the bridge here.
That's right.
Here you can see Kingston Crest and Kingston Road is a low-lying peninsula. You can see it starts out very low and gets higher and higher and higher as you get to the St. Vital Bridge. Now you can see the difference here is very low. They've had to sandbag up 6-7 feet. If you look across at the other bank, you see they've still got some bank left. And then the Churchill Drive Dike, which is above it. So you can see it really depends on what side of the river you're on in some cases as to whether you're going to have to build a dike.
And during that trip, we could also see the dikes in Kingston Row from the water, and it was very eerie because they don't look as good from the water as they did from the land. From the land, they looked really good. From the water, they looked very makeshift. But Joe Petracci said the words to me that I carried with me for the entire month of the flood. He said, the strength of the dike is in the people.
Well, we're at the Fermor Bridge right now, and you can see a large project going on here of sandbagging.
So is this how Kingston Row or Kingston Crescent might be flooded? It would come in at a low spot and then come back at every
Yes, it can. If they're breaching the dike, it will flood the interior.
I see. So it may not be right in front of your house. It might be coming up behind you is the problem, eh?
Everybody's watching it very closely.
If I understand this right then, Joe, I guess the dike is only as strong as the weakest link.
Well, the strength is in the people who are building them and who are watching them.
So, Joe, as the level of the red rises, that will back up the Assiniboine?
Yes, it will. It'll back up to an area west of the city where the slope gets a little higher. They're protected to that height.
All right, we're under the Osborne Street Bridge now. You can see a huge ice flow here.
Watch it!
Whoa. This is the Osborne Street Bridge, and there's one evergreen place. You can see the worry. There is not a lot of freeboard there. Well, Joe, I thank you very much for taking us around today. I want to ask you what the message is for people about the river and the water as far as the harbor master is concerned.
Well, I don't want any disasters. I don't want to see anybody hurt. The message has to be very strong, and people have to watch their children, not come near the waters at all. The city of Winnipeg has declared an emergency. Anybody comes in here with a boat may be faced with some type of criminal prosecution.
Joe, I thank you very much for taking us around on your rounds today.
You're welcome.
Behind the scenes, hundreds of city and provincial employees are fighting the flood and offering assistance. That's the role of the Emergency Measures Organization. Reporter Danielle Kiefler watches as that story unfolds.
You guys looking for volunteers today?
For people in need.
RM of St. Andrews probably are desperate.
People wanting to help.
Rick, you want 10,000 filled sandbags?
What's the Red River doing this morning?
Yeah, sure, we'd be more than happy to accept them.
It's flood disaster triage with emergency coordinators taking 200 calls an hour. Even the boss, Harold Clayton, fields calls. This one from Prince Edward Island.
What do we need are sandbags, and we need some 16-inch pumps.
Clayton is a disaster planning veteran of forest fires and floods. He says each time, Canadians respond the same way.
Thank you. PEI. They're seeking sandbags and 16-inch pumps for us, and they'll get them out to us, so wonderful.
Is this typical reaction from across each province?
It's typical of Canadians. I'll say that much. You want to bring people together, you do it in this event, and it's been phenomenal.
You've got a truck you can loan us?
So too are the hours he and his crew are pulling. 12-hour shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no going out for meals.
My tiredness is from long hours. It's not tiredness from sandbagging and trying to save my home. And all the stress that comes with that, trying to save my community. You got to keep in mind the people that are out in the flood zone, how real this event is to them. We're not watching it on TV out there.
Honda has made a generous donation of pumps and generators.
It's the morning shift change. Crew Chief Tim Prodzik brings fresh troops up to date.
Very important. Otherwise, good luck for the day.
Tim?
Yep.
Were there any more requests for sandbaggers to go to a specific area, or are we still diverting them to the north of the city?
Prodzik says there are no shortage of calls from volunteers and those in need. But he says the most frustrating by far are crank calls that tie up the lines.
When you get a local expert that's telling you how to build a dike or how to hold a dike together with paint or what have you, and then you get a real urgent call from a resident that's in trouble and crying on the phone asking for help. I need help. Can you come in and help me sandbag? I'm going to lose my house. That's all I've got. So it's frustrating for the guys.
But every call is taken seriously. Watch how Gary Trask, an emergency environment expert, deals with this call.
We have some residents in the Grand Point area here that are experiencing high water above what was originally forecast for their area. And they were trying to find out the reasoning behind the plugs that have been placed in the drains that run into the floodway. And they were of the opinion that they could get some relief in the area if those plugs were removed to allow the water out. Okay, the guys in Grand Point are saying if we can knock that open, it's going to relieve the pressure on us.
Yeah, we discussed that yesterday, but then we can't get back in there to fill it up again, and it'll come back out on top of them later. We're going to stick with our normal operating procedure.
Well, no, I'm not arguing it. I got to phone this guy back and give him the reasoning before.
Unconvinced this will sway the caller from Grand Point, Trask wants more answers. He calls the Floodway Control Center.
If the floodway's not going up, can we pop the drain for a period of time to give them some relief and then put it back, or is there something that that can be done for these folks because they're right at they're out of freeboard and they're going to lose.
Trask is told the floodway gates will go up again. Now he must phone the caller from Grand Point with the news. The plug cannot be pulled. He passes on the Natural Resources contact name and some advice.
As of yesterday was that you could expect another 6 inches of water over the next 24 hours. So if you've got that 6 inches, then that's what they were expecting your increased level to be. So I guess you have to try and maintain your freeboard and keep your inside of your dikes clean as long as you can.
It's an ominous warning. Next day, the sandbag dikes around a number of Grand Point homes collapse.
We certainly hear about the negatives quickly. So that's fair enough. I mean, people are impacted individually, and it's very difficult in a flood to blame somebody, and people, it seems, want to blame somebody for this situation that exists. How do you blame Mother Nature? I mean, how better prepared can Manitoba be?
If the bronchial dike fails, it will take...
And as the flood spreads on this day, more disaster plans are in the works. Clayton's daily flood committee meeting is told the city is issuing an evacuation alert later in the day.
This evacuation alert means that at any time in the future we can issue you a 24-hour evacuation notice, is that correct? So start thinking about the fact that you might be called upon to evacuate.
Right.
No more
Based
than
on our
that.
projections, we would have a 40-hour grace period if there was a massive failure.
Only on the...
After the meeting, Clayton gets a visit from the committee's health representative. Keith Hogarth has concerns about this alert.
It's a notification that they may be called upon to evacuate in 24 hours.
We can't adequately evacuate in the time frame the city may give us. So do we move now as a precautionary or not? That's going to have to be really carefully thought out.
Hogarth must find out what to tell officials at the St. Boniface Hospital about the evacuation alert and tell Clayton before the daily press conference later that afternoon.
Put the word out, and if any of your guys have seen it, then let me know.
Well, do you have an existing evacuation plan right now?
I work with the best people there is, and there's no question about that either. It's very easy for me because of the talent that's around me.
That talent keeps Clayton informed, so he in turn can keep government up to date at the daily cabinet flood sessions.
The local radio station is monitoring cellular and MTS mobility fleet net radio stations, so confidential information should not be communicated over these systems. There are a lot of shysters moving into the province, goes without saying. There are a lot of charities that are being set up that nobody can track and has no information as to exactly why they are here. And I referred that to the RCMP this morning for investigation. They call this the Harry and Larry show, but I hate the name Harry. Harry's a duck, so.
Every day, he and flood coordinator Larry Whitney must face a much wider audience, the public. And prior to heading into this press conference, Clayton receives word the problem with the possible evacuation alert for St. Boniface Hospital is resolved.
And, the province is looking at right now, and they've apparently resolved the issue. And that's the word I got coming out the door. The details of that resolution I don't have, so all I was interested in was the result. So, approximately 12,000 evacuees were registered with the Red Cross.
Turns out the answer isn't needed, but Clayton prefers to be prepared for everything. That's disaster planning.
You got to position yourself to respond often to the unknown. You plan as best you can for that, but no situation is the same. So you've got to have the talent in the organization who can cope with that kind of stress and those kinds of variables on a day-to-day basis.
This is the first time he's eaten today.
This is it. Well, no, you caught me with that Bismarck this morning.
The day winds down, but for Clayton, there are more commitments. The national media need him, cutting short a quick bite to eat.
Oh, yes, he is.
Hi there.
That's Harold Clayton.
Hi, Harold. Nice to see you. How do you do? Welcome. Please come in. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Later that evening, it's one last interview. Finally, it's home.
I think I've got the best job in the province. It's responsibility of mine and my colleagues to remain positive because we know that there is an outcome here, and we'll get back to the recovery stage. We're okay. We've faced this challenge as Manitobans, and we'll do our best to fix it and carry on.
24,000 Manitobans have now been forced to leave their homes. Many are from low-lying areas in and around the city. The evacuation is orderly, but a few choose to stay behind and fight.
It's a sight Maxine Clifton sees every day as she brings in supplies to her husband, who has chosen to stay and fight for their home. They live on Red River Drive.
I used to have a real nice chain link fence around this property, but 3 buildings have now gone through it. Here's Paul's shop. I don't know how, with a 10-foot ceiling in it, and that's all that's it. Here's my home and our dike here now. You have put it up.
While all their land and property is under about 7 feet of water, the 8-foot dike around their home is holding. No thanks, they say, to the floodway.
That has backed the water up somewhat, and we've seen increases of anywhere from 8 inches to a foot overnight. So it's always been a battle to get enough bags.
Yesterday, a desperate attempt to bring in volunteers to help sandbag failed. Only residents are allowed past the police checkpoint. With the exception of a few neighbors, Paul and Maxine are now left to fight for their home alone. They have to be creative.
A large roll of irrigation pipe fittings and the whole works was all floating down through our yard. And I knew I'd need some of that, so I gathered it up.
The Cliftons' home is only one of 2 left in their neighborhood that hasn't flooded. Paul Clifton says the reason is simple. Despite a mandatory evacuation order, he has refused to leave his home.
Yeah, but it's too late to be tired. It's just something we've got to win. We've got to beat this thing.
While nearly all of the Cliftons' neighbors have fled, they remain, getting used to the water, like a few others who have also stayed behind. Marivel Tarouk, CBC News on Red River Road.
Actually, the memories that I'll take out weren't really to do with the job as much as going down to areas in the city and helping sandbag and being with people. And one journalist wrote in the paper, said it was roving bands of sandbaggers. And I thought that was really appropriate. Just, we'd be sandbagging at somebody's house, and all of a sudden we'd run out of sandbags, and everybody would just pick up their jackets and head off down the street to another place, and as soon as you saw a pile of sandbags, everybody just jumped in line, and there was hardly any talk. I mean, there was a lot of kibitzing and kidding around about the size of the bags and things like that, but you didn't introduce yourself, or you weren't expecting anybody to say thank you, you weren't expecting anything from you, you just did it. And I like that. That was a lot of fun. It made you feel good to help.
I want you in the middle, Cassie. You come and sit right, or sit here. You sit there, Lauren, and Cassie, you come sit here in the middle.
I'll sit over here.
Oh, okay.
Ulrika can
You
come
sit there, right, and you can peek in there.
We wrote the song because we wanted to cheer up people who had to evacuate their homes. My favorite part was when we said we've got each other. Because that makes me feel that people know that we care about them.
Winnipeggers need all the support they can get. The red is expected to crest on or around May 2nd. The water is rising fast. This is a city under siege, and it all brings back memories of the Great Flood of 1950.
chuck another sandbag on the dike that's wide and long. All we need is volunteers and sandbags, sandbags, sandbags.
The history of the Red River is a story punctuated by the swirling water of spring floods. But it has only been in the last 100 years that visual records have been kept.
In Emerson, Manitoba, on Monday, April 26, 1897, two men shook hands. One was in a second-story room of a hotel, the other in the pilot house of a steamboat on Main Street.
In 1950, the Rising Red brought more than turmoil to Manitoba. It also brought hundreds of journalists and newsreel crews.
These are the days of wartime back again. The uniforms, which so many put away just a few short years ago, fill the street below me. There's a rumble of Army trucks. An airlift flies overhead day and night, rushing sandbags and medical supplies and men. The naval uniform doesn't seem too strange right in the heart of the continent, for they're operating landing craft and small boats.
James Borthwick grew up and worked in St. Vital.
I was one of about 200 to 300 reserve naval personnel was called out on active service, May 1 right until June. And my first job was to send out to St. Vital at Kingston Row. It was too late and too little, and the water was coming up St. Mary's Road behind us. So they had no alternative but to evacuate the entire city of St. Vital.
From where I stand, 8 stories above downtown Winnipeg, the whole city is spread out before me. The city and the surrounding countryside for miles and miles. You see, this is the prairie. It's flat. There's not a hill in sight anywhere. And this is my hometown. There's just one thing the matter. The whole atmosphere is throbbing, as you can probably hear, with the noise of countless pumps at unending work. The sound of Winnipeg in May 1950.
It was far from a normal spring. Kayaks paddled residential streets. Golf games were delayed. But some spring rituals endure any crisis. Irene Gibson has more than one reason to remember the flood of 1950.
I was getting married on June the 3rd, and we were evacuated at the beginning of May. The bridge over the Seine broke down, and we sat there for hours while the Army had to rebuild it. There was us, my sister and my mother and I, and the Andersons and their big Coley dog, plus my wedding cake and all our prized possessions, all packed in this poor one car.
I have just returned from a tour of some of the flooded areas of Greater Winnipeg, and at the northern end of Norwood Bridge, I saw the water seeping through the seemingly solid dike. And to save the span, the dike and pumps were abandoned. The surrender was preceded by an order by Flood Control Headquarters. All residents living in the area bounded by the Red and Assiniboine rivers and Main and Clark Streets are urged to evacuate immediately.
Late on Friday, May the 5th, the main Fort Garry dike was breached. At roughly the same time, a basement pump at 357 Kingston Crescent stopped working. Volunteer Lawson Ogg rushed to the basement to fix it. The back door gave way to the rushing water. The basement filled. And Lawson Ogg became the only fatality of the 1950 flood. That day was to become known as Black Friday.
Back in 1950, the house stood right about here.
John Baker was 12 years old.
Well, I guess my most memorable part of the flood was the weekend we left, the day we left. We got out, what I was told was the last train out from Winnipeg on the Canadian Pacific. And it was just jammed. People in rubber boots and matching Eaton's shopping bag luggage, and we were a pretty scruffy lot. Stood all the way to Kenora, 2.5 hours.
And so tonight, St. Vital, with its farm homes, its riverside cottages, and its lovely residential districts, is just a lonely waste of waters. It's deathly silent. Just the swirling water, the splash of a big army truck wallowing through about 2 feet of it, and the putt-putt of an outboard patrolling a sunken street.
40,000 people had been evacuated from southern Manitoba, and another 80,000 Winnipeggers were caught up in the largest mass evacuation in Canada's history.
Finally, weary Winnipeggers get a break. Even if the Bronchill Dike fails, the city of Winnipeg now says water levels on the Red River would be 2 feet lower than expected, and city dikes can handle it. On Scotia Street, where 500,000 sandbags now protect riverfront property, the news is welcome.
That's great. We're happy. We don't want to be forced out of our homes.
Yesterday, 3,000 homeowners on the Red, the Seine, and parts of the Assiniboine River were put on 24-hour evacuation alert. Now the city says with lower projected water levels, more water could be diverted into the floodway without significant flooding south of the city.
I feel comfortable describing it as a holding pattern we're in, but also saying that every antenna that we personally have and otherwise is still way up there.
So, about 300 to 400 homes on riverfront property already with sandbag dikes remain on evacuation alert.
It's much, much better to be overcautious than to be over-optimistic.
And in St. Norbert, where 2 homes were flooded by leaky dikes, people still worry their homes could be next.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. Although, I mean, so far that hasn't come to fruition.
The city says it isn't taking any chances. It continues to build up streets along the Red River in the city's south end.
I wish it was going up a little higher, though.
I think we don't want to raise anxiety, but we want to recognize at this point, we want to stabilize the situation, and we want to stay on our guard. We want to stay vigilant for the next 5 or 6 days.
The city says all areas that have been evacuated remain evacuated, and anyone who was put on 24-hour evacuation alert on April 22nd remains on alert. And if there are heavy rains or high winds, people who are no longer on alert could end up right back where they were just a day ago. Danielle Kiefler, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Without the Winnipeg floodway, much of the city would be underwater, as it was in 1950. The man who made the floodway happen remembers the day it opened.
October 6th, 1962, the floodway becomes reality.
Well, I had my son with me. He was 3 or 4 years of age, I think. I thought he might like to come and see what was going on. We saw these great big machines standing on top of the earth. They carefully installed me and I think my son at the controls of one of these machines. I don't think I moved a great deal of dirt, but it was a lot of fun. We were starting something that was very worthwhile, and we were very pleased to be on the job.
And the floodway has been on the job ever since it was finished in 1968. This spring marks the 18th time it's being put to the test, and each time it's done its job. With the protection of the floodway, most Winnipeggers escape flood damage. They can thank the foresight of a politician and the ingenuity of engineers. 1997 marked the first time Duff Roblin has ever opened the gates. Reluctant in the past to step into the floodway limelight, perhaps he's coming to accept this too is part of politics.
Isn't it ironic? If I were to list the things that I'm responsible for, I wouldn't put the ditch at number 1. Mind you, it would be on the list all right, but it wouldn't be number 1. I'd put reforms to education, reforms to social welfare and health care. But I'm not going to complain, because if I'm favorably remembered on account of the dike, that suits me fine.
And the name Duff's Ditch?
Suits me fine. Beautiful alliteration, don't you think? Duff's Ditch? That's good.
The military had gone through a pretty rough time because of the Somalia crisis, it seems to me, and they were in desperate need of a kind of rehabilitation. So in a strange way, and I don't mean anything cynical in saying this was the best thing that could have happened to the Canadian military, because they got to come here and be heroes.
Hi, Mom. Yes, I'm still in Manitoba. Yes, it's still wet.
Last Saturday, the Lord Strathcona Horse were in Wainwright, Alberta, training for Bosnia, when they got the order to trade in their weapons for shovels. Captain Tom Bradley.
Sunday morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, Major Steve McCluskey comes up to us and says, all right, guys, we have a meeting in 15 minutes. We're going off to Winnipeg.
This East End Community Centre may look like an armed fortress, but it's really an oasis of help in a city under siege. Every person, every piece of equipment is waiting for a call to go into battle. The calls come to this unit through a command post parked outside the community centre.
He's monitoring the radio and answering the telephone, so any and all direction that we receive from our bosses gets passed to us. He records it down here so that we can pass the messages to the appropriate individuals. He is really the man with the finger on the pulse of what's going on here. Well, in this current location right now, we have 250 soldiers. What the soldiers are doing right now, it's a variety of tasks. First of which is the quick reaction force task. If a dike does break within our area of responsibility, these are the first people that go on in. It's kind of a 911 force that goes on in, plugs the gaps.
So basically, the normal powers you would have as an ordinary citizen.
The military has its own chain of command, but the assignments and the 911 calls come from the city of Winnipeg.
Primary role is patrolling of dikes in support of the city, and also to act as a quick reaction force to reinforce the dikes under city control.
On Glenwood Crescent, the military was called out to shore up some leaking dikes. They worked all night and are now back checking the job.
We had about 75 people from the Army here helping us shore this up yesterday, and that helped a lot because it was seeping much more than it is now. It gives you a lot of pride in the armed forces, and also in the fact that you know that there's, if something does happen here, there's going to be a lot of people putting a lot of effort into stopping it. I think we'll win this fight if it doesn't come any higher.
All right then.
Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Have a good day now, eh?
You too.
Yesterday there were Army helicopters overhead, there were amphibious vehicles here, and there were boats on the river, so it was a war zone. But it was very comforting to see them, yeah.
At Elmwood Cemetery, a unit is on standby to protect a rapidly eroding riverbank. While on patrol, an additional assignment makes its way down the chain of command.
And then the next priority is the swath of land along the floodway.
Which is on the other side?
The next one will be on this side. Obviously, it's in the St. Norbert area, and there's lots of damage in there. Okay?
With new orders, the armor is cranked up and moved out. They leave from both the East End Community Centre and the Minto Armoury. Their destination is the high waters around South St. Mary's Road. "80% of Canada's deployable military is in Manitoba on some kind of flood duty.
I've got soldiers working under my command in Victoria Crescent, Kingston Crescent, here at Christie Road, and doing dike watch and preparing for quick response to leaks in a whole variety of areas in the city, and we were maxed out.
The first step of any operation is reconnaissance, what the military calls a recce. A Cougar, a six-wheeled amphibious vehicle, is sent out to assess the situation. The rest wait.
Time in 30 seconds will be 15:30.
While a patrol is set up for the Christie area, orders come in for a new task.
Gentlemen, orders. Situation. The water is moved up to the dike that is south of the floodway. It's completely underwater. Within that area, there's little enclaves of houses that are all diked in. Phase 1 is the commander's recce and link up with the Navy. Phase 2 is emergency repair to 2 critical homes. Okay, they may only last 1 to 2 hours. Okay.
Hey, 7-4 on me.
You are.
7-1 to the carrier.
It will be a difficult and dangerous mission. The houses are accessible only by boat. While the commander prepares to survey the situation, the city sets new orders.
Well, that assignment has been scrubbed in favor of another one of a higher priority, and that's over in the St. Norbert area on the opposite side of the river.
In evacuated St. Norbert, the mood is frantic. The city works to finish the secondary dike along Rue des Trappistes. The military concentrates on smaller battles.
Is there any way we could get another line coming around this side of the house?
I'm standing on the L dike in St. Norbert, and as you can see down here, the heavy machinery is frantically trying to build this dike up in case the primary dike fails. Now, there's a house here on the corner whose smaller dike unfortunately didn't survive the rising waters of the LaSalle River. And that's why the military, and we've been following them all day, are frantically building a dike down here because this house and the two houses next to it are in very serious danger of going down to those same waters of the rising LaSalle.
If the break is not contained, this whole house and this one here will go. Really? That one here is a loss. It has been lost, though you still will go if we don't get this second dike in.
On the other side of the highway, on Lord Avenue, the unit from Christie Road is deployed to strengthen the dikes. When they arrive, they discover the sandbags are nowhere near the house most in need of help, so they improvise. They've been on Lord Avenue before, but at one house, the call came too late to reinforce a weak dike.
The bottom caved out. My driver was standing on it when it caved. This here is about, well, there's a whole floor there. As you can see, it goes down about 16 feet.
And so it goes. The major battle may be won now that the Red River has crested, but the military knows that you can win a battle and still lose the war. So they equal the river's persistence in skirmish after skirmish, day after day. For 24 hours, I'm Robert Enright.
The dikes in Winnipeg are patrolled around the clock. Most are holding. The river crests on May 2nd, and the city breathes a sigh of relief. But there's a sharp rise in levels at Grand Point, just south of town, and 65 homes are either flooded or in danger.
Just below the water level, there's a little red tag that the rural municipality put up and said this is the height you have to put your dike to and you'll be okay. We built it to the height they wanted, and as you can see, wasn't enough.
It is among the final cruel chapters in the story of this flood, a story seen across the country and around the world.
I felt horrible for the people. I felt horrible for the situation, but it really was exciting. I mean, sleepy little city of Winnipeg, southern Manitoba, Red River Valley, everyone's accustomed to, I mean, the biggest thing that happens here is mosquitoes in a lot of ways. I mean, that's the big talk. But this thing was catastrophic.
And good evening from the junction of the Red and the Assiniboine Rivers in the heart of downtown Winnipeg. This is a city literally on the edge tonight.
And reports like this kept Canadians on the edge of their seats. Over the last few weeks, the eyes of the world have focused on Manitoba and the rising red.
And that's going to come through here, and it's going to be the same way.
Premier Philman was quietly confident, saying everything was, pretty groovy, actually, right on.
Our projections so far have been right on, and all of the various anticipations that have been made have been right on.
But there's no question as the rising red rose, it sure got crowded. At the Forks, you had to book ahead to go for a stroll, and no matter what the story, it was harder to say what was taking up more riverbank, the flood or the media.
Well, wind is also a problem north of the city of Winnipeg.
The media had moved in, and everybody had to be live. Who are you here to do today?
We've been doing City TV, BC TV, CBC, you name it.
So it's a busy sort of media event, this flood.
It's getting busier by the moment. As the river rises, so does the interest in what's going on.
What organization are you with?
Calgary Herald, Maclean's Magazine.
I'm a citizen.
Toronto Globe and Mail.
ZDF, which is a public station in Germany.
University of Manitoba. Why is the Calgary Herald interested in the Winnipeg situation?
Well, it's a major story. There's a lot of sympathy and empathy from Albertans who've experienced floods before.
We love Canada, and we have been here before, and I think it's a big disaster, and I'm pretty amazed how you guys are handling it.
So you've been out to see the floodwater? What do you think?
Awesome.
Anything like this happen in Germany?
I remember in 1962 or so, we had a big flood in Hamburg.
You being interviewed today?
Yes.
Of course, if you want to make stories more real, you've got to interview real people, over and over and over. And for the real people, this can get a little confusing.
Who's talking to you today?
Pardon me?
What station are you doing the interview with?
What station am I doing the interview?
Check 6, sir, from Victoria, British Columbia.
Check 6 from Victoria, British Columbia.
Well, it got so that anybody with a sandbag in their hands was a potential interview, and at least one person thought he might capitalize on the event. That should shore up some support. That one bag ought to plug a few leaks. And as the river rose, competition for new angles on stories increased.
Can I have a peek in? See what you guys are doing?
You know, we're here to copy whatever CBC does, and then we'll report it 5 minutes later. And because the people are watching one or the other, they'll think we came first anyway.
And as homeowners in southern Manitoba know only too well, the flood takes no time off.
So how long have you been going now, Jennifer?
This is my 11th day now without any time off.
I think we're on about day 12.
Day 16 or 17.
My days now follow river crests. They don't follow natural days of the week anymore, just river crests. I wake up in the morning and I say, what river crest day is it?
As Crest Day rolls into Crest Day, people are fatigued and wary. In some cases, perhaps it affected journalistic judgment.
Why would they be interested in this story in Vancouver?
Because they think, because of the national media coverage, that Winnipeg is about to be hit by a tidal wave a la Hawaii Five-0.
Now every story has a lead character. Here's the star of ours. It's been the Larry Whitney Show from day one. And every day, patiently, he's answered the same questions over and over.
There was water on both sides. That didn't concern you at all?
No, because when we started...
And for this unlikely star, what's the hardest part about fighting the flood? Is it James 24.5, the floodway flow, 59,000 CFSs, the Z-dike breaching, the forecasting, what?
So a lot of your job is trying to come up with a forecast and then dealing with the media.
That's right. Yeah.
That's the harder of those two.
The media.
Today, not much has changed at the river except that it's crested, and so it seems has some of the media attention. Lots of room for walks at the forks today.
The crest of the Red moves north of the city, troubling people all the way to Lake Winnipeg. Meanwhile, millions of dollars in donations are pouring in. There are benefit concerts on CBC radio and television.
Maybe we can't be there throwing sandbags right now, but here's a check and here's our encouragement. Go get it. Stand tough. Hang in there.
And there's gratitude for those who joined the fight, win or lose, in the battle with the Great Flood of 1997.
They clapped, they cheered, braving the cold winds and steady rain to say goodbye.
Well, I left my house at 10:30 this morning. I didn't know what time it was going to be on.
At the height of the flood, there were 8,000 soldiers in Manitoba, 1/10 of the Canadian Armed Forces. It was the largest gathering of Canadian military in this country in decades. As the convoy wound its way through downtown streets, the mayor and local flood fighters said they could not have won the battle without military help.
We simply would not have been able to manage without them.
They came when we were in our direst need, and they helped bring the dike up a couple more feet, and they also reinforced it. And so I think they made a big difference.
For the soldiers in the 130-vehicle convoy, the outpouring of gratitude was overwhelming and a much-needed morale booster after Somalia.
I'm just amazed going through Winnipeg, the way we went through Winnipeg, everybody coming out to meet us and everything. It really hit me here, and it's just mind-boggling. The last couple of years haven't been that good for us, and this is just amazing. It's just amazing. That's fantastic. The kids are giving us this stuff. This is excellent.
These military vehicles will be loaded onto trains over the next few days and taken back to the various bases.
We don't call it Friendly Manitoba for nothing.
Excellent.
Excellent. Very good.
I'd like to thank everybody in Winnipeg for all their hospitality today.
Del Simon, CBC News, Winnipeg.
For others, there can be no cheering, just the sorrow of loss, the labor of rebuilding.
My office was right up here on the second floor. I've been down here several times and standing in this spot thinking maybe there'd be something left, but there's nothing.
Mike Jacobs, the editor of the Grand Forks Herald, lost his home to the flood and his office to the fire that followed.
This is the basement. Bill Clinton had very good advice when he was here, and he said, "Don't be ashamed to be brokenhearted." So you've got to deal with grief. I'm obviously still dealing with grief. But, you know, there are stages of grief. Understand what's happening, understand the anger, the loneliness,
the blame, the guilt. You'll understand that and get on with your life. That's what we're doing here.
As the month of May marches on, the water level continues to drop and tensions are easing. But there's a massive cleanup still to be done and thousands of compensation claims to go through. But someday, even that work will be done. There's a hope that one thing will last: the love and support this community discovered during the flood of the century, both for the people who lost everything and for the people who were there to tell the story.
People talk about the winters and the mosquitoes and all the downsides of Manitoba. But throughout all of this, there's a huge sense of pride. And even though we, as reporters, didn't have the opportunity to go sandbagging or help out in that way, there was just a great sense of pride of what we were able to accomplish as a province.
Sandbags! Come on! Sandbags!
The human effort of everybody coming together and for a common goal was unreal. I've never seen anything like it.
Hey-yo-ho, hey-yo-ho, hey-yo.
I would say to the ones that are suffering in pain from the results of this flooding that life matters more than things. And I heard that from people who are hurting, saying things we can obtain again and we can build things, but we have our life, and life is sacred. All my relations.
Every time it seems like there's more and more water.
It's a question of wiping out what we've built for 3 generations.